What's growing on, gardeners? It's Tuesday, April 8th, and it is a beautiful early spring day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. On today's video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how to transplant tomato plants and pepper plants so they explode with growth.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
In this video, I'm going to teach you how to transplant these things both in ground and in containers. I'm going to show you how to fertilize them and also how to support them as well. But first I want to show you my transplants. These right here are my indeterminate tomato transplants, and you will notice that they are all way too tall. That's because we've had a really cold spring. It was 37 degrees here 2 days ago in the morning. So I wasn't able to plant these out as quickly as possible. These are about 2 to 3 weeks too big, and this is one of the risks that you run. You may have a really late spring on your hands. So the good news is they will be absolutely fine. But generally speaking, your tomato transplants should not be this large. You want them to be probably about 4 to 6 inches smaller than this. On the other hand, my pepper transplants are the perfect size. These are just what you want to see in pepper transplants. They are prime and ready to go into the ground. Step number 1 is to prepare your seedlings for transplant, and this is going to be the same whether you're growing indeterminate tomatoes, determinate tomatoes, dwarf tomatoes, or pepper plants. In all cases, we want to remove the first couple sections of leaves. So this leaf right here, which doesn't look like a tomato leaf, that is not a true leaf. That is the leaf that breaks ground. The false leaves that when seeds germinate, they just use to push through the soil medium and get themselves exposed to light. So we always want to remove that first leaf. Now, here is where you have the very first true leaf. We are going to remove that leaf and the one right above it. And the reason why we want to do this is we don't want those leaves contacting the ground, because if soil from rain or irrigation were to splash on the underside of those leaves, they can lead to premature disease. And we have plenty of leaves on this plant right here in order to absorb sunlight for photosynthesis. So it's not going to harm us to remove those few low leaves. The procedure is going to be the same with our pepper plant. You will see the first 2 leaves on the bottom right there. They are not true leaves. They are false leaves that are only there to break through the surface of the soil upon germination. So we are going to remove that leaf there and that leaf there. Now I have about a 3 to 4 inch section that is exposed before the first leaf. Now with pepper plants, we plant them flush along the soil line, so we're not going to bury this deeply like we would a tomato plant. I'll get more into that later, but that being said, I don't think there's any need to break off this first leaf right here, because there's plenty of room between the area that the soil would splash and the underside of the leaf, so I'm happy with this. The story is a little different with this pepper plant right here. The first 2 true sets of leaves are really low to the ground, so I'm actually going to snap them off. And they look pretty weak, so we're going to rely on just the top of this pepper plant to absorb the sunlight to grow. Step number 2 is to prepare our slow-release fertilizer blend, and I'm going to use 3 different additives to do that. The first thing I'm going to use is an organic all-purpose fertilizer. This is a 533 NPK, but anything around a 555 will do. I'm going to use bone meal, which is a great source of calcium and phosphorus, which is very important for the flowering, fruiting, and root development of tomatoes and peppers. This is a granulated product, not a powdered product. I like the powdered products better usually, but this was really cheap and I couldn't say no, and it still will work just fine. Then I'm going to use this. This is one of my secret weapons for growing tomatoes. This is crab and lobster shell meal. I have issues with root knot nematodes here, and the chitin inside actually helps inhibit their development. So I'm going to do this at a ratio of 2 to 1 with the all-purpose fertilizer. I'm going to do 2 scoops of the all-purpose fertilizer, 1 scoop of the bone meal, and 1 scoop of the crab and lobster shell meal. And I'm going to mix it all in this leftover pickle container. So we do 1 cup of the organic all-purpose, 1 cup of the bone meal, we do 1 cup of the crab and lobster shell meal, and then we do another 1 cup scoop of the organic all-purpose, and then I'm going to put a lid on this, and I'm going to shake it around so everything gets all nice and mixed up. You don't have to use the crab and lobster shell meal if you don't have an issue with root knot nematodes. You can just do a 2-to-1 ratio of organic all-purpose fertilizer to bone meal. And that right there is our fertilizer blend. If you're curious where I purchased these fertilizers, I will provide direct product links down in the video description for your convenience. Step number 3 is to lay out all of your transplants in the proper order so they are ready to be installed in an assembly-like fashion. This may seem like something that isn't worth mentioning, but I'm telling you right now, this is a massive time saver. Have all of your plants in the correct order, exactly where they should go. It will save you a ton of time from having to shuffle everything around as you go. When it comes to sizing your containers, that is going to depend on what you are growing. All of the tomatoes here are indeterminate tomatoes. For indeterminate tomatoes, I recommend 20-gallon containers. These 20-gallon fabric grow bags are perfect. For your determinate style tomatoes, I recommend a minimum 7-gallon size, up to 10-gallon, especially for more vigorous determinants like Celebrity. For peppers, I recommend anywhere from 3 to 5-gallon containers. If you need a source for containers or grow bags, I will link to them directly down in the video description. In step number 4, I will show you how to actually transplant the tomatoes, but I'm going to do this in 3 different waves. I'm going to show you how to transplant tomatoes in containers, tomatoes in ground, and then peppers in ground. And for all intents and purposes, you would plant a pepper in ground the same way that you would plant them in containers. First, I'm going to show you how to transplant tomatoes into containers, and this assumes that your container is already prepped and ready to go. Now, in the past, I've showed you how to make high-quality container mix. I will link to that video above and down in the video description, but this is basically just a blend of peat moss, topsoil, and compost. So this is ready to go and plant in. And the first thing I'm going to do is dig myself a nice, deep hole, because tomatoes have the unique ability to root along the stem periodically at the nodes. So I actually want to bury this stem a few inches deep. I'm not going to plant this flush with the soil line. And this is going to be very beneficial because my plant is so long and lanky that it could actually get damaged in the wind. So by planting it more deeply, it's going to help avoid that problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is, after I dig the hole, I'm going to take my fertilizer blend and I'm going to take a big heaping scoop, which is about 2 tablespoons, and I'm going to place that in the bottom of the planting hole. And then I'm going to take the root ball out of the container. And to do this, always flip the container upside down and squeeze the bottom. Never ever pull your plant up out of the container, because if you do that, you could snap the stem. It's very dangerous to do that. So I have really nice looking roots right here. We are going to plant that deeply into the planting hole, trying to bury some of that stem. And this is a bit of an iterative process. I want to go a little bit deeper. And then this is going to help bolster the stem a little bit, because my plant is really unnecessarily tall. And then on top of that, I'm going to take another 2 tablespoons of fertilizer and top dress around that root area, and then lightly work it into the soil. And then we're going to go and do this exact same procedure for every single one of these tomato plants. Now I will show you how to transplant a tomato in ground. And this variety right here is called Red Snapper. It is actually a determinate tomato, but it doesn't matter. They all transplant the same, whether they are determinate or indeterminate. So we have pre-dug our hole extra deep. And again, we are going to flip our tomato upside down. And then we are going to pull gently lift the bottom of the container off and make sure that our tomato is planted extra deep. And then we are going to orient the plant in such a way that it stands straight up. So that actually means I want to kind of cock the root ball to an angle right here. So again, I'm going to place some fertilizer in the transplant hole. I'm going to place the root ball a bit on an angle, which is not a problem. And then we are going to backfill that transplant hole, press it down gently, about halfway, and then in a little ring, we are going to top dress it again with about another tablespoon or 2 of the fertilizer blend, and then we are going to fully backfill the tomato and then press it down, gently tamp, and then label it so we don't forget what it is. And last but not least, we are going to plant our peppers. Now the nice thing about planting peppers is we don't have to dig the planting holes nearly as deep. And that's because peppers are not planted deeply like tomatoes are. They don't root along the stem. So we just want to plant them flush with the soil line. Now remember, break off any of those low leaves if you haven't already, and then make sure that your hole that you dug is such that the top of your pepper plant will be flushed with the top of the soil. So I'll make it a little bit deeper. Then I will do the same procedure and add about 2 tablespoons of that organic fertilizer blend. I will backfill it about halfway, press it down, sprinkle a little bit more on top, work it in to the top layer of soil, and then make sure that we tag our pepper plant so we know exactly what the variety is and we don't get anything mixed up. And that's really all you have to do to plant a pepper. It is that easy. Now when it comes to plant spacing, I space my individual pepper plants 12 inches apart. I like giving each pepper plant 1 square foot to grow in. Now some people may say that's a little bit aggressive, but I've had great luck with this spacing. I wouldn't go any closer. You can give them more room if you want, but 1 square foot per plant has always served me well. For determinate tomatoes, I typically space them 18 inches apart, but this year I'm trying an experiment where I grow them 12 inches apart. I'm going to see how well they do. These are less vigorous plum-style determinate tomatoes, so I think I can get away with growing them a little bit more closely. But for the more vigorous beefsteak determinates, I'm still sticking with my roughly 18-inch spacing. I'm primarily growing my indeterminate tomatoes in containers this year, so obviously you plant 1 individual plant per container. However, if I were planting my indeterminate tomatoes in ground, I would advise up to 24 inches of space between them. You may be able to grow them 18 inches apart, but you will have to prune them more aggressively if you do that. Now that everything is planted, we move on to the next step, which is step 5, and that is to water in all of our plants with plain old water. And it is very important that we soak down all of our plants, whether they are in containers or in the ground, because this is necessary for the water to finish compacting the soil. We can't have any air pockets on any of the locations that we planted our plants. So make sure that you water every area in very well to finish the compaction process and squeeze out any air that may be reserved in that soil. Now that everything is planted and watered in, we move on to the next step, which is step 6, and that is adding a compost and mulch layer to our plants. Now I'm not going to add any compost to my containers because my container mix is 1/4 compost all mixed in already. So it's unnecessary there, but I do want to do it for all of the plants I just planted in ground. Now when it comes to what compost to use, I don't really care as long as it is finished compost and you know it's good stuff. So you can go to the store and get cow manure compost or mushroom compost. You can call in for a truckload of locally made compost. You can use your own homemade compost. I'm going to be using this cow manure compost I get from a local company that supplies my local Lowe's. So that's what I'm using. And the way that you know compost is finished, generally speaking, is that, well, first of all, it should basically look like dirt, but it should also smell like dirt. So smell it. Make sure it doesn't smell like anything at all, really. If it has any odor, don't use it yet. So we are going to place a 2-inch thick ring around all of our plants, like you see right here. And what this is going to do is, this is going to feed the soil, all the microbes, the bacteria and the fungi that naturally exists in your soil. It is going to benefit that. And it's also going to aid in the decomposition of the fertilizer that we added to our planting hole and the top dressing, because we're adding more bacteria and more fungi to our soil with the compost. Now it's time to add the mulch layer, and the mulch layer is a really critically important thing because it not only suppresses weeds from germination, but it provides even moisture by preventing evaporation. It's really important stuff. It will also break down over the course of the season and feed your plants as it decomposes. Now when it comes to actually selecting a mulch, I don't really care what you use as long as it is a natural mulch. Do not use dyed mulch from the big box stores. That is mostly construction supplies and old pallets that they grind up and then dye artificially to trick you into thinking it's wood. That's why it's actually cheaper than the hardwood bark mulches. use. Don't use rubber mulch because that is usually old tires. Don't use stone mulch because it doesn't break down and provide any organic value. You can use any kind of natural wood mulch, any kind of bark mulch. You can use shredded leaves. You can use weed-free, seed-free, herbicide-free grass clippings. You can use pine needles, you can use pine bark. What I'm going to use is old wheat straw that I used to insulate my banana plants over the winter. So old wheat straw is some of my absolute favorite stuff to use in the garden because it does a great job at interlocking together and not allowing any kind of weed seed germination. And it also provides great moisture retention. And it's just easy to use. It's a lot lighter than bark mulches. So whatever you can get available for a good price, and that is all natural, feel free to use it. The next step is so important, but it is one that so many gardeners skip, and that is step 7, watering in your plants with a water-soluble fertilizer. And a lot of people start to say at this point, this is so many steps, I thought we already added fertilizer, I thought we already added compost. Well, compost and those slow-release organic fertilizers take time to break down and release those nutrients to your plants. The plants need food now. Transplanting is a stressful process, and these water-soluble fertilizers are immediately bioavailable to your plants, and that can help them recover quickly from transplant shock, so they take off like a rocket instead of just sit there stressed out trying to recover. Now, the one fertilizer I always add to my watering can is my favorite fertilizer on earth. Alaska fish fertilizer. This is the best stuff on earth. It's made out of all the fish guts and fish parts that they can't sell to humans, that they then basically pulverize into a paste, and then it ferments, and it is immediately bioavailable to our plants. So this has all of the nutrients that are in fish. So we give it a nice shake, and then we will pour about 2 to 3 tablespoons of that, just eyeballing it, into our watering can. Yes, it's a little stinky, but it is the best stuff on earth, and you quickly become nose blind to it if you use it a lot like I do. Then I'm going to add a scoop of my favorite not organic water-soluble fertilizer, and that is Jack's 2020 or J.R. Peters 2020. It's the same company, it's basically the same thing. This is the J.R. Peters Professional, but the Jack's 2020 is just as good. Now, if you don't want to buy a giant thing of fertilizer like I have right here, you can get a smaller one. I'll place a link down in the video description for it, but if you don't want to do that, you can just go to a big box store and get yourself a box of Miracle Grow Tomato. I know a lot of people don't like using this stuff, but there's really nothing wrong with it. It's not going to harm your soil or your plants when you only use it twice a month, and it will give them a big boost. Remember, we have a very limited growing season. We have to get the most out of our plants in only a few months. So this is a 2-gallon watering can. I'm going to add a 1.5 tablespoon scoop, which is a little bit less than a tablespoon per gallon, which is recommended. You can add a little bit more if you want. I think the fish fertilizer basically makes up the gap, but if you sprinkle in just a touch more, I won't tell. So now I'm going to fill this up with my rain barrels, and I am going to water in my plants. And it is very important that we mix this very well so everything dissolves. Now, with these water-soluble fertilizers, it is okay to have the concentration, basically dilute it in half and feed your plants twice as often, but you never want to over-fertilize. You don't want to exceed the manufacturer's recommended dose because that could burn the plants. So never exceed it, but you can go lighter and increase the frequency if you want. Now, generally speaking, a 1-gallon watering can would be enough to feed about 3 to 4 tomatoes or 4 to 6 peppers. This is a 2-gallon watering can, so this is just about perfect to feed these 7 tomatoes right here. So again, about 3 to 4 tomatoes per gallon or 4 to 6 peppers per gallon. And my final tip is step 8, and that will be supporting your newly planted tomato and pepper plants. Now, if they're really small, you may not have to do this yet, but my plants are pretty large, so I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how I like to do it. And my favorite way to support indeterminate tomatoes that grow as vines and can continuously grow indeterminately, I love using the string trellising method. So I buy these double tomato hooks and tomato clips, and then I tie them to a trellis. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but I will link to all of this stuff down in the video description. I simply hang the clip up overhead like this. Now, a lot of people try and secure these lines to the ground when they string trellis, and that is a rookie mistake. These are not supposed to be a firm, hard trellis like a stake. They're supposed to sway with the breeze. That's what makes them stronger. Just like a skyscraper sways in the breeze, in order to strengthen it, the actual swaying motion takes the rigidity out of it, and it actually it alleviates the pressure, so there is less pressure on your tomato plants. So what you do is, you take one of these tomato clips, and you will close the tomato clip right underneath one of the leaf nodes, and then you will gently wrap the string around once or twice, and if you wanted to, you could take another tomato clip and then clip it underneath another node right here. And that is a wonderful way to support your indeterminate tomatoes. I've been using it for years. They've made it through several tropical storms like this. For more vigorous, larger growing determinate tomatoes like these Red Snapper or Celebrity Plus tomatoes that can grow to be 4 to 5 feet tall, the string trellising method works pretty well. For less vigorous determinate tomatoes like these Plum Regal plum style determinate tomatoes, you could always Florida weave them, which is what you see right here, or you could use a tomato cage, which you see with this eggplant right here. Eggplants grow very well in tomato cages, and so do smaller determinate style tomatoes. Another option for dwarf tomatoes or determinate style tomatoes that don't get very big is good old-fashioned staking. I have a rebar stake supporting this early determinate tomato right here. This cup is on here because I was covering them because we had a 37-degree night, and I don't want the frost fabric to be punctured by the piece of rebar. But rebar is great as a tomato stake as long as the plants don't get too large. I haven't added any support to my peppers because they are small enough right now that they're not really wind vulnerable, but if they get a lot taller, they may benefit from some support. That being said, when I plant these in 1 square feet very closely together, I often find that the peppers can grow into one another almost like a forest and sort of support each other. So if you plant them closely enough and you don't have a really windy climate, you may not need support for your peppers. That being said, if your peppers grow very tall, they can benefit from staking or trellising. Some good ideas are the Florida weave method. You can use rebar stakes, and you can even use smaller tomato cages if you have adequate spacing. So as you can see, there are a ton of different ways that you can support your plants. I'll place a link down in the video description for a playlist where I have all of my different trellising ideas that I've done over the years. There is a ton of information in there for you. This is going to be one of the biggest video descriptions with the most information I've ever made, but it will be worth your while. Everything that you need will be in that video description. And that right there is how to transplant your tomato and pepper plants so they explode with growth. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. Like I said, I placed direct product links down in the video description to everything I featured in this video, and while you're down there, just below that will be my Amazon storefront link. You'll see everything I use in real life in my garden with that link. While you're down there, you can also check out my spread shop link for custom merch if you want to support my channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Well, it's lunchtime, and I don't have a handsome hound anywhere in sight. But I wonder what would happen if... Uh-oh. You, Stinker McPot! Stinker McPot! Who didn't know that you would show up as soon as I stabbed the cheese? You know, Dale, usually when Dad cuts the cheese, people run away. But you come closer, don't you? Okay, buddy. Come on, let's get on your bed. On your bed. All right, Mr. Handsome, catch. Oh. Be great if Dad could throw, right? Hey, better than nothing. Love you, buddy.